All right, good morning, everybody. We'll go over a few things with you, and if you have questions on it as I'm going, just let me know and we'll try to get them answered for you. Just go over a few things real quick while I hand it out to you. The one that's stapled together, that's our schedule for today. We're going to start with the review, me talking about the budget, then we'll have office holders come in and visit us and talk about their respective budgets. I also gave you a potential COLA. I'll discuss that as we go along these budgets for both the general fund and solid waste. And then the other thing I gave you was the budget snapshot, which tells you a quick overview of where we're projecting the 22-23 fiscal year to land. Estimated revenues at $17.5 million, estimated expenditures at $19.5, giving us a $2 million deficit, balancing our fund balance, projecting to land at $7.9 million at the end of 22-23. So that's just a really quick overview, and we'll go into how we got those figures here shortly. If everybody's got their notebook open, the very first page is the data assessment summary from the property assessor's office. This is some of the information that I used to calculate the value of our penny. You'll see up there at the top right, there are some manual calculations where I had to add in the public utilities, which I get over from the trustee's office, which then brings us to our total assessment. And then some more calculations down at the bottom. You'll see the value of our penny this year at 93% collection rate, and that's $124,869.53. So we have a pretty strong penny. Of course, some larger counties have a better one, but we're sitting pretty good with that. Some counties' pennies are much smaller, which makes it much harder to generate revenue in the need of a property tax increase. That next page was where I got the public utilities figure from. If we flip to the following page, that's from the state talking about the state raises were at 6.18%. We're capped at 5%, so that's what you'll see for the elected officials. You'll see a 5% increase. The very next page is from the Administrator Office of the Courts. It sets the COLA adjustment for the judges. Theirs was at 4.7 this year, so you will see 4.7 on to the General Sessions Judge, and then that multiplied by 40% for our juvenile. Haven't yet changed the juvenile projection, so he's still in the budget as a 2-day employee. When that comes back, if that comes back and it is voted in, then of course that figure will change and he will go up to being the same as the assessment judge. So keep that in mind. This budget's running $2 million behind and doesn't have a full-time position yet for that juvenile position. The very next page is your Cpas salary schedule. They changed the way they do this. It used to be a page per official. Now they've got them all on one spreadsheet here. If you'll follow that population class line down to us, which is the 50,000 to 64,999, you'll see what all of our elected officials are making this year. The sheriff has that salary supplement, which brings his up, which then in turn pushes the mayor because he has to be 5% ahead of the next highest elected official. So you'll see those calculations are done there, and those are what the officials will make this year. Any questions so far before I go into the general fund? Moving right along, you pull back that general fund tab, the first thing you'll see there is an index. You may want to pull that out so you can follow along different budgets as we go along through the day. It's there for your convenience, or you can get in the front, whatever you prefer. And then the next pages behind that are the blue sheets, which are our general fund notes. First thing that covers the tax rate assessment, which we just briefly went over. This budget is based on the current information received from the property assessor's office, with the total assessment being $1,342,683,100. The assessment has been reduced $300,000 to allow for any further appeals or other changes. Our penny at 100% is $134, and at the 93% collection rate, it will be the $124,869.53 that we are using for this budget. All budgets are always based on a 93% collection rate. Just for reference, last year's budget assessment was $1,332,642,047. So our total assessment went up roughly $10 million there. Revenue, current property tax, which is one. The current property tax is based on the current property tax rate of 2.1677, of which 78.03 cents is allocated for this fund. Ratio is still at 1, being only 1 removed from reappraisal. Through the month of March, we have collected 101.3% of the budgeted property tax collections for 21-22. Therefore, even before collections for April through June we have exceeded our estimated projections, which is typical. Property tax usually comes in very strong in December and then again in February. So we have exceeded our budgeted figure, but these last 3 months will taper off significantly. Just for reference, the same year, last year we were about the same rate. Prior year tax collections, interest and penalties. Revenue collected in these accounts will be approximately $41,000 less than what was budgeted, so next year they've been lowered to reflect that shortfall. Going over to the next page, pickup taxes, also on page 1 of the general fund. Estimated revenue for the 21-22 fiscal year is above budget. In prior years, we have had pickup taxes for Valdo and San Don. It does appear that there will be increased amounts above budgeted estimates this year. Next year's projections is increased slightly to match. The wheel tax, also on page 1. Estimated revenue for the 21-22 fiscal year is slightly above budget. Estimated collections have been listed separately on the budget document so that the commissioners can see the original wheel tax amount is collected, as well as the additional 30-10 split collections. This will allow the general fund to be balanced for the 17-18 fiscal year per orders from the State Comptroller's Office. $10 is also able or eligible to fund other public safety expenditures, including the volunteer fire department, rescue squads, Hawkins County Emergency Response Team, Ambulance Service, American Red Cross, and the Hawkins County Humane Society contributions. Any considerations of a special funding request for these agencies and/or public safety departments will be funded from the undesignated amount in the revenue if available, or reserve if available, But based on our revenue and expenditure projections after last year's increases to several of those agencies, the expenditures now outpace the revenue. There will no longer be a reserve after the 22-23 fiscal year. So we've been tracking that in the past, and sometimes we've even given them some one-time contributions out of that reserve. But after all of the increases last year, those contributions, that is no longer the case. Those reserves are diminishing extremely quickly, and they will not last another fiscal year. So there will be no more reserve from the $10. Other taxes, fines, and fees, which is our page 1, 2, and 3. These revenues have been based on the actual amounts posted in March 2022, plus estimates for the remainder of the year. These accounts appear to have stabilized after being reduced last fiscal year. No further reduction is needed for this fiscal year. Litigation tax, courtroom security, it appears we will collect the amount of $80,000 that was budgeted in the 21-22 fiscal year. Thus, we are budgeting the same estimated revenue for 22-23. Contracted prisoner board, account 46915, which is on page 4 of the general fund. For housing state inmate. Total collections through February board bill payments are about $200,000 less than this point of year last year. We were made aware to expect this fall in revenue last year. The estimated collections for this revenue in the first draft are on track to exceed the budgeted amount of $200,000, and the estimate for next year has been increased by $150,000. This is still a greatly reduced revenue from years past, but it will be increased to reflect current collections. We were told that the sky was falling on that revenue last year, so we bottomed it out. It didn't go quite as bad as we planned, but it is still significantly down. So I have brought it back up some, but nowhere near the level that it used to be. This one was the direct result of the pandemic and the effect it had on the court system and the state prison system. The state had a surplus of beds when years past there was always a shortage. This revenue has rebounded slightly, but it's still decreased in projections. For reference, the 17-18 fiscal year, the board bill brought in roughly $1.6 million. So although it is not as bad as we had projected, it's still down quite a bit. Many of the revenue accounts posted are a month behind, so for the first draft, actual revenue figures are being estimated for at least 3 months, if not 4. By the end of the fiscal year, when actual revenues are posted, total revenue will change, hopefully with a positive result, not negative. Switching over to some notes on expenditures. Salaries. The elected officials receive raises for the 22-23 fiscal year according to the county official salary schedule publication from Cpas. If you went over there at the beginning of the book, a copy is included with your budget information at the beginning, behind the assessment information. Step raises are included for all general fund employees. A COLA has been worked up to present to the commission at the request of nearly all, if not all, elected officials due to extreme inflation. In years past, we had usually waited for the commission to ask for a COLA and then worked up and show you what it was going to cost. But it was on everybody's mind. I don't think there was one official that didn't mention to me that their employees were hurting with the way that gases went up, foods went up, and everything around them. And their buying power is not what it used to be at their salaries. So it's been worked up in advance, and that's one of those documents that I pass out to you. Medical insurance. Medical insurance estimates for the 22-23 fiscal year include a 10% rate increase. We used to only do 8 there, and last year it actually came in at 8. So we felt to be conservative, we had to go up a little higher. Hopefully we'll have a good year with insurance, but it just seems to be trending in the wrong direction. We have left the employee-employer split the same for the first draft at 30% the employee and 70% the employer. It will likely be August before we know what the increase will be. Since the plan year is November through October, we have calculated a 10% increase for 8 months. The total cost for medical insurance has increased since changing this plan due to more employees picking up the insurance as well as adding their dependents. The Sheriff's Department and jail budgets are usually estimated to include extra policies to be available should there be a need for new or current employees to participate in our medical insurance plan. Additional policy premiums have also been included in account 58600-207, from which retirees' medical insurance premiums are paid. Funds should be available if an employee must pick up insurance in the middle of the year, resulting in the need to transfer appropriations from 58600 account to the appropriate office or department. The county allows a retiree hired prior to November 1st, 2017 to continue in the medical insurance plan until he or she reaches age 65 or becomes Medicare eligible. The county continues to pay its portion of the retiree's premium until that time. If the retiree has a dependent and wishes to continue coverage on the dependent until he or she reaches age 65, the county pays no portion of that premium. Additional changes may be made in medical insurance estimates before the final draft if there are personnel changes or coverage changes made before June 30th. Employer contribution rate for retirement. The current employer contribution rate is 6.02%, with Hawkins County elected to pay 7% in the Tennessee Consolidated Retirement System through June 30th, 2023. Actuarial studies are now performed every year to determine the employer amount. We have received our rate calculation that will be in effect for July 1, 2022. Our rate increased to 6.02 from 5.68% with encouragement to pay at the higher rate. We have budgeted a real rate of 7%. This will help offset any future rate increases. And we've been doing that for several years, and it's actually been quite successful. There was a rate increase this year, but it was because the Tennessee Consolidated Retirement System changed their rate of assumption on their investment returns. So they dropped that 0.5%, if I remember correctly, and that was what provided the upward pressure on everybody's rates. A lot of people saw rate increases higher than what we saw, but because of that overpayment, we were to help control our rate and keep it from spiking. Hawkins County is a contributory participation in Tennessee Consolidated Retirement System. This means that employees contribute 5% of their salary, with the county paying the employer's share. Some counties and entities are non-contributory, meaning that the agency pays the employees 5% as well as the employer's share. TCRS benefits are not based on the amount paid in for each employee, but rather on the 5 highest consecutive years of salary and the number of years of service credit. Contributions to area agencies. Contributions have been included for budget calculations in the 22-23 fiscal year at the same level that was budgeted for 21-22 for all agencies. Listings of documentation for area agencies will be included in the contribution request notebook. Although they are in there at the same rate as last year, go ahead and warn you, we'll talk about this much more tomorrow, but there is several area agencies who are asking for increases. I think Mr. Bubbles already covered one of those, put out an article about it, but there are several others. And so you will see an increase of requests of around $500,000 for our other area agencies. So just be on the lookout for that. Our budget currently, like I said, is at a $2 million deficit for 22-23 before we look at any new requests for our county and before we look at any new requests for area agencies who want contributions from us, before we look at any COLA for these employees. So just want to make sure everybody's aware of that. And contracts with government public agencies. Most contracts with government public agencies, such as First Tennessee Health District, First Tennessee Human Resource Agency, etc., have been budgeted at the same level as 21-22 fiscal year. The budget amount for the Johnson City Forensic Center has been included in Hawkins County's share of $121,984. However, there is no new contract at this time, so that could change in the coming months. Children's Protective Services, the Juvenile Detention Center budget amount has been increased $5,000 to $175,000. And that's one of those that unfortunately we just don't have a whole lot of control over. When those juveniles go to the court system, if he deems that's where they need to go, or they've been sent there before he gets a hold of them, we just have to pay the bill. Other budget increases. Increases for computer maintenance contracts and other necessary expenditures to operate effectively have been included in this first draft. Some requests above previous year's budgets have not been included and will be not until approved, which we'll see on the additional request worksheets included in your budget, which is that green page I think I've got in everybody's sleeve in front of the notebook. Those will be the new requests from our county departments. Reminder of the maintenance of efforts for the Sheriff's Department, Election Commission, Library. There's also maintenance of effort for the Property Assessor and a few others sprinkled through there. Board of Education. The amount budget for workers' compensation insurance may change once we finalize our insurance quotes. We have the drug-free workplace program in effect and receive a 5% credit on our premium cost. We also receive a safety designee credit of 1%. General, solid waste, and highway funds pay their appropriate share of workers' compensation premiums with any applicable credits being applied, even though rates may remain basically the same from year to year, or even sometimes go slightly down. The premiums will generally increase due to increase in wages. June 30th, 2023 unassigned fund balance. The first draft of the general fund budget shows an estimated unassigned fund balance of $7.9 million at the end of 22-23 fiscal year. After June 30th, 2022, this figure will change because the first draft usually will have expenditures slightly overestimated and revenues underestimated. Actual expenditures in the Sheriff's Department, actual revenues for the state board bill will be a major determining factor of the changes in fund balance. The last several years, we have not had to do a tax anticipation note for general fund to operate until property taxes were collected. That should be true again this year because of our fund balance. So that's a positive thing. Cpas recommends the general fund unassigned fund balance should be at least a minimum of 18 to 20% of total budgeted expenditures. The estimated unassigned fund balance for 22-23 is at 40.59% of the total estimated expenditures and other uses. So we are fairly healthy above that bare minimum. It is necessary to maintain a good fund balance to continue to obtain the bond rating that we have now. A rating of AA3 was assigned to the March 2021 bond issue. The financial health of Hawkins County will continue to be monitored by those in the bond and investment market. Also, a good fund balance is needed when you have to make grant expenditures before filing for reimbursement. Future budget changes. In future budget drafts, some expenditures funded by grants or insurance recovery funds may be switched from 21-22 to 22-23 if the project is not completed or underway before June 30th of 2022. This will not change the estimated fund balance. It will just change the revenue over expenditures for 21-22 versus 22-23. Any questions on the general fund?
That was approved in 2007. The 40 cents, what's the rest of that go to? I mean, nobody's ever told me.
The $40, the 30-10 split,
Yes.
and $30 just goes to balance the general fund in totality. The general fund had a deficit, needed to be balanced, and so that just offsets the general fund as a whole.
Yeah, I didn't know. I mean, nobody ever.
It was just merely the balance. The $10 was to the public safeties that I read earlier, but the other 30 was just to balance our revenues compared to our expenditures.
Okay.
And in 17-18 it did, and a couple of years after there, it still held its own, but we're starting to trend the wrong way now. Nobody's got any other general fund questions? We'll move along to solid waste, which is the next tab there in your notebook. With the 2010-2011 fiscal year budget, the county mandates change that requires solid waste fund to be funded by designated revenues instead of the transfer from general fund that in the past made up a major portion of revenue for the solid waste sanitation operations. In the past made up revenue for the general fund, solid waste fund. These particular revenues were chosen simply because the total of their anticipated revenue, together with the usual revenues of waste tire disposal, recycled materials, and solid waste revenue, to fund. We have 1.6% of budgeted collections and 177,000 more than this time last year. This revenue was under budgeted for the 21-22 fiscal year at the advice of the Comptroller's Office due to some pandemic revenue collection changes. For the 22-23 fiscal year, we will increase that budgeted amount by $350,000 over the 21-22 budgeted amount in a conservative effort to get more in line with the actual revenue. When the pandemic first hit years ago, this was one of the revenues that they panicked on that said, we were going to see a significant drop. And some counties did, some of the larger counties did, but in more rural areas, we didn't see that. And matter of fact, it just continued to strengthen. So we were conservative 2 years ago, we were a little conservative last year, We're gonna start pulling that thing up now and get it more in line with what revenue collections are actually looking like. Business tax. Total collections for business tax appear to be the same as was budgeted through March. We're about 11,000 more than at this time last year. We're budgeting 22-23 at the same 350 as we did 21-22. Cable TV franchise license. Even though collections through February 22 are some 5,500 less than the same period of time last year, the percentage revenue for 22-23 has been increased by some 17,000 to better reflect actual revenue being received. Another one we're trying to bring up. Sale of recycled materials. Total collections have been estimated at roughly 37,500 more than the budgeted amount. Thus, we are increasing this revenue by 17,500 for next fiscal year. Solid waste grants. 22,000 has been budgeted for a state waste tire grant based on current collections. This has been kept the same budget revenue for the prior year, even though the actual revenue may fluctuate slightly from year to year. Alcoholic beverage tax. Total collection should be about 13,000 greater than the budgeted amount. We're at 84.7 of estimated revenues. Thus, budget revenues for this tax year are being increased by $3,000. Sale of equipment. There was one sale of equipment during the 21-22 fiscal year. The surplus trash trucks were sold. The proceeds being the cost of the trucks. Thus, the reserve sale of surplus trucks was used to bridge the difference. There should be some 84,000 in reserve at the end of fiscal year 22, but maybe short of some amount in 22-23. When we first started that program, we had excess trucks, and so the first sale we sold, and so we had more proceeds than we had costs going out. So we established a reserve in the solid waste fund for the future purchase of trash trucks. Every year after that, it's been a 2-for-2 swap, and although those sales are going very well, we are draining that reserve slowly but surely, and that reserve looks to probably run out here in the next probably about 2 years. Expenditures. Some of the salaries in the past were a mixture of full-time and part-time employees. From 1920 forward, we have separated those into 2 different line items for the benefit of the solid waste director as well as the accounting department. There is a 10% estimated increase included for health insurance from November through June. The actual rate increase. Estimated amounts for workers' compensation insurance may change when we receive our final insurance quotes. However, it appears that we are sufficiently budgeted for workers' compensation in all categories, so the appropriated amount should not change. All budgets in solid waste saw a reduction in state retirement due to the TCRS rate of 7% in 1920, down from 8.68. But as we discussed, our current rate is 6.02, and we're going to keep that at 7% overpay to help drive down any future increases. Sanitation management, we've increased trustees commission 7,000 due to revenue increases. In waste pickup, part-time personnel line item in the budget, we've not been able to keep a part-time driver employed. In the 2013-14 budget, we increased the overtime line item and decreased part-time, and continue this through 22-23 budgets. If there's ever an ability to keep a part-time driver employed, we can do a budget amendment to move those funds back. Convenience centers. This budget was affected by the new $12 per hour minimum wage rule for full-time employees and the $10 per hour minimum wage for part-time employees. Salaries have been updated in both 21-22 as well as 22-23 budget estimates to reflect those changes. Other waste collection no longer in use. Per a budget amendment during the 18-19 fiscal year, all the appropriations for this budget are now in the recycling center. Recycling center. As of 19-20 fiscal year, budget recycling center salaries are now broken out into full-time and part-time employees. This budget was also affected by the $12 full-time and $10 part-time. So those salaries have been updated in both 21-22 and 22-23. You guys already passed that, and in 21-22, we did a budget amendment for the prorated portion of the year that was left. But you're going to see a little bit larger increases in those budgets this year, because this year we're running full 12 months at those new salary rates. Landfill operations and maintenance. The contract with BFI has been budgeted with a 10% increase over 21-22. I don't have a letter from them yet, so we're just asking that. Last year, particularly high, Mr. Lilly was able to negotiate that back down some, so we hope they won't have a rate increase as large as they did last year, but we're budgeting 10% until we know otherwise. Other waste disposal. This function is for waste tire disposal and is funded mostly by tipping fees and the state grant. Interest on notes. This line item is budgeted in case there is a need to do tax anticipation note to be able to operate until revenues are received. We've not had to do this for the last several years and have no need to do it this year as well. Bottom line for solid waste. It appears that the revenue budget will support expenditures for this fund with no new revenue needed. The estimated ending unassigned fund balance for the 22-23 fiscal year is $3 million. This is a fund that, due to the changes in sales tax, is doing particularly well. Don't want to celebrate it too soon, But in future budget years, we may need to start talking about capping the sales tax at a certain amount and rolling that revenue over to our general capital projects fund. Any questions on solid waste?
This cable TV franchise, is that money from Holston Connect?
No, it's Charter and Comcast.
Or we can think Holston Connect?
We're not.
So that's not gonna last too long.
Possibility, which is also a reason I don't want to move anything out of here yet. We want to give that some time to play out and see how that revenue behaves. It's still going strong as of now. They are affecting that revenue.
What about the sale of equipment? We're not gonna do swap trucks. Is there any money in reserve for that?
That reserve is dwindling. There still is about 84,000 in that reserve, but due to the strength of this fund, it would be completely reasonable to fund that difference if you wanted to maintain that program when that time comes that there's no longer a reserve.
Look at the savings we got from the maintenance of trucks, could go into this fund somehow. We can look big now.
Let's take a look at that and see where the maintenance is at. This is a good question. That'll be on page 4 of your solid waste budget under the waste pickup function. Now, unfortunately, that line is only got 15,000 in it. I think they reduced that one when they initially started the program, so no, there's not a lot of excess money in there to shift.
How much did you have to take out of that fund balance on the last deal on the trucks? You said it went down. How much did you go down?
I have to get that figure for you, Keith. I don't have that one right now, but I can get it. We actually lucked out because, if I'm not mistaken, we were put on the list to pre-order those trucks and got them before the used vehicle market spiked as bad as it did. So I think we locked in our price on those, and then by the time we made it to our sale, we were able to recognize the used price vehicle spike on our sale. But we won't be that fortunate again this next year.
Very concerning the landfill. We got a contract, so
Year at a time.
like 4% maybe.
They have an amount per tonnage, and then they have an overage, but they look at it every year and review it, and the way things are going, the way fuel cost is, I would anticipate another large increase, but like I said, we just don't have that letter yet. But in that letter, they show you their calculation on how they figured out the increase. Anything else on solid waste? If not, moving along to drug control fund.
Is the contract still with BFI?
Yes.
Or that's no contract in some way?
Oh, that one. Which one's which one's out?
Snapshot Republic or something.
Right. Was Republic. But it's what, names again, have some on the truck.
There's no formal notes on the drug fund. Any questions for that, you can direct to the sheriff when it's his time to present. He did try to cut that significantly on the expenditure side, because this fund was depleting. The downside of that was, when you have less operations, you seize less money. So although he did cut the revenues for us, it advertently also cut the expenditures to a degree. That, and also he's explained to me in the past that the rules for allowing them to seize the money to come back to the county has gotten tighter. So they're receiving less and less of the confiscated proceeds from drug arrests. Due to that, this fund is going the wrong direction. He has cut it, it is going slowly, As you can see, we're estimated to only go 13.5 into the negative, but long-term wise, if those rules continue to change and they continue having a hard time getting revenues in there, we may have to consider putting something else in here to fund this, if this is a fund you want to continue to maintain. But as far as any detailed questions about the operation, I would defer to either the sheriff or Tony on those. Next tab is the highway fund. Estimate for the current property tax is based on the current property tax rate of 2.1677, of which 11.87 cents is allocated for this fund. Assessment is based on the most recent information from the property assessor's office that we went over, with $1,003,000,000, 93% collection rate, for our penny at 124,869.3. Current property tax are estimated to finish some 29,000 above the budget amount of 2122. The net total of local taxes collected appears to be more than was budgeted by about 25,000. Overall revenues are fairly consistent with the amounts that were budgeted. Gasoline tax could be approximately $250,000 more than what was budgeted. This was one of the revenues we were advised to keep our estimates conservative due to the pandemic. We will increase this projected budget for next year to come close to realizing the actual amount of gasoline tax being received. That was another one that we were advised we had to watch. It was going to drop significantly. It just never actually happened. So after 2 years of being conservative on that, we're going to get that more in line with what we're actually expecting. Highway superintendent will explain during his designated time the expenditures if you have any questions on those. Do you have any revenue questions on highway for me? We'll just touch briefly that as I knew the outgoing road superintendent was not going to run, I asked him to trim this budget for us, and he graciously agreed to do so. So you'll notice on the expenditure side there was significant cuts made. He had a reputation for being very frugal, but not knowing the next leader of that office wanted to tighten up that budget to make sure that it was a little safer. And so he has done that for us. You'll see if you turn to page 6 on the highway tab, you'll notice the original budget for 21-22, the total estimated expenditure line, which is down towards the bottom of that budget, was $8.3 million. And for the estimated 22-23 fiscal year, total estimated expenditures, he's trimmed that down to 6.7. So trimmed about 1.6 voluntarily. So I think that was quite commendable. I appreciate him doing that. I want to make sure that you guys realize, though, when I say that, we didn't touch his revenues. So no revenues have been taken from the highway fund. The highway fund has a 5-year running average maintenance of effort. And if you don't watch that, if you go below that, the state will then take some of their tax money away from the county. So only trimmed the expenditure side, didn't take any revenues away. Questions on that side? We'll flip the next tab. That's our debt service funds. They are all in the same tab here. Our general debt service, our highway debt service, and education debt service are all in this section. They're in order, starting with general debt service. Revenues on general debt service. Property tax, estimate of current property tax for 22-23 is 2.1677, of which 6.28 cents is allocated for this fund. And that's at our 90% collection rate with $124,000 per penny. The 18-19 fiscal year tax fund was decreased to 1 cent, with the remaining usual 7 cents being allocated to the general capital projects fund. This allowed for proposed capital projects to be funded at the same amount as the refund to general debt service fund for repayment of the spec building in the Bibsman Industrial Park. Hawkins County refunded by the Industrial Commission in principal and interest that paid to build the spec building at $721,248. The tax rate for 19-20 was budgeted at 5 cents, which included returning 4 cents from the general capital projects tax rate. The remaining usual 3 cents was left as a portion of the tax rate in general capital projects fund to fund the jail sewer grinder project and future projects. The tax rate for 2021 was budgeted the same 5 cents, with the tax rate for 21-22 changing to 4.28 after the reappraisal. The proposed property tax rate for 22-23 fiscal year in this fund includes returning another 2 cents from general capital projects fund. This is absolutely necessary in order to build sufficient revenue to meet future debt payments. Last year in budget hearings, I discussed that this fund was in trouble and that I would appreciate consideration of a tax increase overall or a rate increase in this fund. It was not granted. And I was explaining at the time that last year a penny would cost 2 pennies next year, 3 the year after that, and so forth and so on. So before waiting any longer, I had to move them so that we could make our debt obligations. And I had to rob Peter to pay Paul. So we have how to keep from issuing new debt. The board committed to make projects allows us to finance, allows us to have tax measures. So, regretfully, had to move those 2 pennies over. If we could figure out anything else to do for that general capital projects fund, I would greatly appreciate it, because that's what keeps us issuing debt. Account 40266 litigation tax for jail. This is general service fund used for retired justice center project. This year's estimated last year. This project is original on $4.10 investment income. This is the account into which interest earnings on the county trustees' investments are recorded. Interest earnings are shared at this time with school cafeteria and educational debt service funds. Projections for this revenue for the 21-22 fiscal year are also down, as well as next year's estimates. All of these investments have taxed significantly with the extremely low interest rates. Expenditures in this fund are retired debt for the purchase of property for and construction of the Justice Center, jail renovation of the courthouse, and the purchase of solid waste equipment. There are now 3 separate bond issues for this debt. Other expenditures include paying agent fees, other debt service charges, and trustees' commission. Paying agent fees and other debt issuance charges are fees paid by administrative services, bonds, capital outlay notes, and or bonds. Interest division. The interest earned that is deposited in general debt service fund and education debt service fund has been determined by the amount of fund balance in each of these funds on a June 30th basis. The division for 21-22 fiscal year was 19.31% of total interest earned for general debt service and 80.69% for educational debt service. If no motion is made to do otherwise, the division of interest posted to these funds will be determined in the same manner as the 21-22 fiscal year. Projected interest division for 2023 is at 15.47% for service and 4.3% education debt service. I heard there was a question at a BOE meeting regarding how we calculate the interest division. Right there is how the basis. So, education debt service are a substantially larger portion since they have the substantially larger fund balance. Beneath there you'll see fund history, and you'll see how the property tax rates fluctuated through the years, as I kind of addressed earlier when we talked about the sale of the spec building and the capital projects fund. And then the obligation, you'll notice the current debt for the Justice Center courthouse renovation. You'll see the bonds that we have there, principal, and then total outstanding principal and interest. And that concludes general questions on general debt service. We'll move on to highway debt service.
That 2 pennies was to be put back in. How much money would that save us in the future?
That 2 pennies. And 124, 869, 50 comes out to almost $250,000. It's $250,000 that had to be moved from capital projects where we didn't have any set budget expenditures usually. I mean, it was just money for things that come throughout the year, major projects, $40 is getting pulled out of there, and we'll look at that here as well. To have you put in here to make these debt payments.
I mean, if you put it back in capital projects, it would save us money down the road.
It would save us money down the road, but we can't take it from this fund because, yeah, the debt's there.
Oh, I understand.
Yeah, okay. We have no choice but to make that payment.
Right.
But yes, I think we need to show a strong commitment to the capital projects fund. Action is to finance something. That's true in our personal lives, it's true here in government. Hearing no questions, move along to highway, or special debt service fund, which we use for highway. Again, that's in that same tab, just a couple pages over. It should be the next blue sheets that you come across. Highway roads, debt service fund is funded by 1/3 of certain wheel tax collections, and I want to harp on that for just a minute. I know the wheel tax is controversial, and a lot of people get frustrated when they go over there and pay $96, and then they say their roads are in good shape. But that line right there is funded by 1/3 of certain wheel tax collections. So this highway debt service fund is only getting 1/3 of the original $20 wheel tax. So when they go over there and renew that tag, $6 and some change is going to offset the debt from the highway department. So a lot of that money goes to general fund, a lot of that money goes to education debt service, some of that money goes to the schools. Only $6 and some change per renewal of tag is going to the highway. And that's highway debt service. None of it is going to the highway operational budget. So I know there's a lot of confusion and a lot of misinformation floating around regarding the wheel tax and the condition of people's roads. Just want to make sure that everybody in this room is fully aware of how the wheel tax works, where that funding goes.
It was $20 and a third of it went to the schools, third to the general fund, and third to the highway department.
Correct.
Originally.
Third to the general fund, a third to highway debt service, and a third to education debt service. That's correct. Okay. The 1989 gasoline taxes that are received from the state were transferred to the special debt service fund from the highway fund, but that ceased in 11-12 fiscal year when the highway department needed that revenue to help with operation expenditures. The wheel tax collection still appears sufficient for retiring the current debt. Expenditures highway debt service fund budget includes payments for principal and interest on one refunded bond issued for highway and road improvements and/or bridge construction and purchase of equipment. June 30th, 2022, which would be as follows. You see down below, there's only one debt issue still pending for highway, and there's the outstanding principal on that. And, although this fund is decreasing, that debt service fund is payments. So although it's decreasing, the projections on it look sufficient to retire this debt. So there's no need for any attention to this fund currently. Other expenditures include paying agent fees, other debt service charges, and trustees commission. Paying agent fees and other debt issuance charges are fees paid to banks for administrative services related to our bonds, capital notes, and/or loans. Any questions on special debt service fund? Hearing none, going to move along to our last debt service, just a few pages over, and that is education debt service.
One more question.
Yes, sir.
Would it be to our benefit to maybe take some of this money we got coming in and just pay this off?
We would have to consult with our debt person, which is Scott Gibson over at Cumberland Securities. Some of these bond issues aren't callable until a certain time.
Okay.
It would be something to explore if it is callable, see what the rates are, and see what's to gain there. It's something we could investigate into.
I agree with you, Commissioner.
Yes.
Anything else on highway debt service before we move along? All right, starting education debt service. Purpose of this fund is to record retirement of debt that has been issued for schools. Most of the debt is retired from property tax collections and will tax collections allocated to this fund. However, certain debt that is retired from the general purpose school fund is also recorded in the educational debt service fund. These payments can be viewed as pass-through postings, since the revenue received from the Board of Education equals the amount paid out. Revenue, current property tax. Property tax rate of 2.1677, 24.82 cents is allocated for this fund, and 9% leverage of our penny, as we discussed at 124, 869, and 50 cents. Investment income, this is the revenue account, interest earnings, account interest are recorded. We discussed that earlier in general debt service. This is the other half equation. Contributions. This is used to record revenue received from the general purpose school fund, purchase fund for principal interest and administrative fee payments to the 2009 and 2010 Qscab issues and the ESI loans reimburse this fund. Even though the Board of Education fund retirement of this debt, accounting practice requires that these payments are recorded in education debt service. So that's why GS for us, and then we receive it in and pay out the expenditure. So they are paying this debt, but it flows through our debt service, and that's because the county's the only one who can issue debt. So it has to flow through us, and that's how we handle it. Transfer in. This account is used to record the transfer from general fund for the interest due on the 2010 Qscab issue. IRS guidelines require that the IRS subsidy that is received semi-annually for the issue be ran through general fund instead of debt service. And so that's why your general fund to transfer out and in debt service to transfer in. Have to follow the laws. IRS that. Division of interest earned is because of general fund, debt service fund, and education debt service fund has been determined by the amount of fund balance. We discussed that earlier. 19.31 for this year, 0.69 education. Changes will follow the same logic and put 15.47 to general debt service next year, 84.53 to education debt service based on those fund balances on a yearly basis. Expenditures. The expenditures in this fund are for retiring debt issued for phase 1, 2, and 3 of school construction projects and other school improvements funded by the 2009-2010 Qscabs through the Tennessee State School Bond Authority in the ESI loan program. That is of June 30, 2022 should be as follows. Interest, and at the bottom there you'll see the totals on those. At the very bottom you'll see the debt retired from general purpose school fund. That's that flow through that they were talking about. And there's the 2 Qscabs in the 3 EESIs. We have paid off EESI 1 and 2 now, but you'll see now we have picked up EESI loan number 5 down there. So that's our newest EESI loan, and that's the one where they did some of those HVAC upgrades as well as that LED lighting conversion. On the next page, this fund has expenditures for paying fees, commission, and other additional charges, of which the Board of Education was for share of fees. And you'll see the tax rate history for this fund. You'll see how the pennies have changed over time. You'll see that most of those reductions coincide with the reappraisal year, so it's not actually a reduction. I think that's some confusion that's been caused in the past, that there's been money taken from them. When you have a reappraisal and the value of the penny changes, you no longer need the same amount of pennies in there to equal the same amount of revenue. So just want to make sure everybody's aware of that. 2010 qualified school construction bond issue. County Commission passed resolutions in June and August 2010 for Hawkins County to be part of the 2010 qualified school construction bond, which is what I refer to as the Qscab issue. Resolutions were discussed with the Budget Committee and County Commission. The project was that the projection was that these bonds would be low interest bonds, and that the Board of Education would fund retirement of the interest in the administrative fees. The bonds were actually issued in such a way that the IRS would pay a subsidy to the entities who were participating, and the total amount being the entire interest requirement for this issue, until such time as the debt is completely retired. This subsidy is not restricted to debt service, but as the Board of Education is funding return of this debt, it is assumed that the subsidy will be used for interest payment. The Office of State and Local Finance informed participating entities on June 6, 2011, that the deposit of this subsidy must be deposited in the general fund in order to comply with IRS tax regulations. Therefore, in order for us to meet this compliance, the subsidy has been and will continue to be deposited into general fund, with the equivalent amount being transferred to Education Debt Service Fund each time interest is due on the 2010 QSCAP issue. The general fund and Education Debt Service Fund budgets will continue to reflect the appropriate line items to allow this process. Also, there will continue to be applicable language regarding this issue in the appropriations resolution of the budget document. These procedures have been discussed with state and local finance office and with local government audit. Debt management policy. Updated debt management policy was passed by County Commission on April 22nd, 2019. One of the requirements for the Governor's 3-star program is that the debt management policy be reviewed annually by the County Mayor and the County Commission. And that is why you will see in your packet that we're reviewing this month. No changes have been made to it. Service. Just one thing, you'll turn to page 2 in Education Debt Service. You'll see this estimating for 21 actually increase in revenue over expenditures, and is projected to have another increase in the 22-23 column. So this fund is in very good shape, and you can almost say good shape. This is somewhere that we could potentially look to have pennies or fractional pennies moved to our general capital projects fund. However, I hesitate saying that due to the pending CTE construction facility that is going around. I don't know exactly how that will play out, but from the numbers I've heard, there is going to be a shortfall unless the governor's budget picks up a large portion of that facility. So although this fund is in good shape now, if it is the will of the commission to build that facility and there is a revenue gap, we may not want to mess with the pennies in here. So
Eric,
a lot of unknowns there.
on the education meeting we had the other day, the $5 million they were trying to get out of this year's budget did not go through.
Okay.
So, and he said
Thank you.
but they were looking at some other revenue sources. I don't remember what they were. Do you remember?
They changed the wording. on the
CTE
top.
funding, they're getting 5.5 million in CTE funding.
They are getting that.
Yeah.
In the new,
Yeah.
but as far as the grant, it did not go through. So
Okay.
there are other options that
Okay.
they're looking at. So.
Like I said, although this fund could possibly have its tax adjustment, not knowing how that's going to play out, we may adjust it one year, have to adjust it back the next. So I would be a little hesitant to do that, even though it's showing right now 100,000 excess next year.
I believe on that 5.5 million, they said it was up in the area yet where they could use it
Well,
for
I
construction.
talked to Gary Hicks Sunday about asking about that, and he
Okay.
said that they removed the restrictions.
Okay, we had not heard that.
Okay. Well, that sounds positive, but even that being said, if that's 5.5, we've pledged 2, the school's pledged 2, that's 9.5. Is that the final price tag?
Close to no.
Most likely there will be a shortfall there. So where does that money come from? And if it comes from the issuance of debt, then if we take from it this year, we'll maybe turn around and ask them to put money back in it next year. So make of that what you will. The next tab in the budget is the General Capital Projects Fund. No formal notes on that one, as there's not much to discuss. Other than I do want to show you that the overall tax rate has not been changed by myself. You will see over here the 2.29 cents on page 1 there at the top, reduced from the 4.29. So you'll see clearly the 2 cents went into general debt service and went out of general capital projects. So our overall tax rate has not changed yet. However, that is a conversation that we need to seriously consider. I know that nobody wants to talk about taxes, nobody likes taxes. Like I said, this fund is one of my favorites. It allows us to not issue debt for everything that comes up. past, I know we have issued debt school away from that. We have to get away from it. Anytime you can do it, it's much better. As we get hit with things that you can't expect, this is a great place to go. But we can't go here if there's no money in it. So you'll see our revenues have dropped roughly $250,000 from 22-23 budgeted year to budgeted year. This fund is currently still doing well. However, this was to do a Justice Center roof repair or replacement, whatever was necessary. Luckily, we have the ARPA money to consider that with, but had that not happened, large expenditures like that without having to hit our budget. So, any questions on the general capital projects fund? If not, I think I have ran over just here. I think we're time to start hearing offices, and the first office we will hear is the election office. They're on page 9 of your general fund tab. No motion to be made today. This is just a hearing. I was asked in the past to make this today. No question. They were asked why we don't make one of the office holders present. The reason we don't make decisions during hearings is because you can't make a decision on office holder 1 when you haven't heard what office holder 2 was going to ask for. So although they may have had a good thing that they was reasonable or it seemed reasonable at the time, people already committed to it, and when you find out office holder 2 or 3 had a much greater need, but now you've already committed to office holder 1, we're stuck. So we hear everybody, and then we meet and make motions for calculation purposes for the second round. So today's just a list. Feel free to ask as many questions as you like. But all we're going to do is listen, and we'll make determinations at a later date.